James W. Jesso. Thank you very much for coming on today, man.
Hello, Gary. Thank you for having me.
So I've been diving into your work for a little while now, and obviously, I love the message, what you're putting out. You're fighting the good fight. Um, First question to you is, why do you do what you do? Why are you spreading this message? Why are you talking to the very interesting people that you talk to? And yeah, where did this all come from?
hmm Uh, yeah, I guess the answer to that might be different depending on the angle of approach in a way. Like, why am I doing it in the sense of what my intended outcome is? And then why am I doing it in the sense of what inspired me to move towards the actions that hold the intended outcome? So, in regards to the inspiration, I feel like a lot of it is connected with having gotten so much benefit from psilocybin mushrooms in particular in my life, and having seen how much benefit the way that I manage to language and translate like psilocybin experiences, to see how much benefit that offered the people around me, to sort of inspire me to talk more about my experiences in hopes of creating good, having a positive impact on psychedelic culture, or whatever mainstream cultures around cultural's relationship to psychedelic mushrooms, as a way of giving back to the mushroom and as a way of giving onto hopefully the well-being of the people I care about, and increasingly onto the world, as best I can anyways, within the small pocket that's available to me as just a individual person.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, that was sort of the maybe the start of it many years ago. And increasingly it sort of is just, it kind of snowballed into, from doing some talks to writing some books to doing tours and doing a podcast and YouTube channel and all the rest. And it continues to be from that place, in a sense of like, oh, I've gotten so much benefit from psychedelics, and in the sort of the foundations of psychedelic culture that were laid by those before me, that I feel like it's important for me to be giving back into it by trying to hold a certain quality of discourse or quality of inquiry around
Mm-hmm.
psychedelics and put that into the cultural field. And I guess that ties into the hopes, the intended outcome, which is just to be continuing to put in and forward, hopefully generatively, the discourse around psychedelics and in psychedelic culture, so that increasingly the culture becomes maybe anti-fragile is sort of like a high bar, um, but it becomes increasingly a space and a place wherein people can easily and accessibly find nourishing, supportive, clear-minded frameworks for making sense of their psychedelic experiences in a good way,
Mm.
as well as just contributing to the field at large. Because I mean, like, I'm excited about it. It's interesting. I'm enthused. The inspiration, in the sense of being like in spiraling, or like calling in the spirit of a thing, or being spirited, or in good spirits or whatever. All of that
Mm.
kind of feels like part of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Like you're doing the right thing.
I'm doing what at this point is the closest approximation I have for what it is that feels like the right thing for me to be doing
Mm-hmm.
with the life that I was granted, that with the life that is on loan to me, for the time frame that I'm still here.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's almost like I totally feel you on that. I think it's like some kind of moral obligation from times past, or from this mushroom intelligence. I almost feel like I need to talk about how crazy this is, Like I can't just keep this to myself. I need to connect with people like you and people all over the world that are also going through this experience, and be like, "Hey man, you feeling this too?" Or like, "Hey, this happened to you?" Like I almost feel like if I were to keep this bottled up and just in my own life and just keep this as some kind of personal endeavor, it wouldn't be as special. You know what I mean? Like the connection part of the psychedelic culture is like half the battle for me, you know? It's half the experience of what this is connecting with other human beings that have also taken large amounts of this substance or substances, other substances, or gone to the, you know, the psychedelic realms of the mind, and being able to be like, oh yeah, this happened with me, and then this happened with you, and you know, we come together and create some kind of cohesiveness, you know, in the in the mix of the psychedelic headspace. But yeah, man, what you're doing is definitely a positive contribution for sure. Like 100%, you are creating that environment for people to come and soak in the, what am I trying to say? You know, soak in the information of the psychedelic headspace in an intelligent and, you know, sophisticated manner, where it's more than just, it's more than the ideal of, you know, the hippie in a drug rug at some rave or a music festival. You know, you're actually approaching it from a an educated point of view, and that's highly valuable. It really is, man.
Thank you. And to speak to what you had just mentioned there, um, is about like the connection being part of the battle, and like having these profound experiences, and part of what allows us to, the big buzzword now, integrate, or in a sense of like you could say ground those experiences in the day to day of being alive as ourselves in the world, is being able to get some sense that it's not just us, that
Mm,
there's some validation that yes, that is an experience, and yes, that is powerful, and yes, you can walk in the world with that as a part of what you've been through.
mm-hmm,
And that having the culture and the communities, culture is not necessarily community, but communities can arise within certain cultural pockets, is a great way of getting that connection. And part of my hope and my intended outcome, at least part of my intended outcome, it's not so much a hope, it's an active, involved, directional thing, is that around my content there can be discourse and discussion and community and cultural change as well. So the culture changes as the discourse unfolds, but communities can utilize the content that I'm making as reference points to meet each other, talk with each other, sense make together, learn together, grow together, work together, pass through psychedelic experiences together, walk through life, psychedelic people together. That not necessarily that my content is what's causing that, but it becomes sort of some sort of reference point by which that can unfold for people in their lives and in their relationships. And it's cool to hear you speak to, I'm inferring, but I think I got that accurately, to you feeling something akin to that, or
mm-hmm,
accessing something akin to that through the content that I'm producing, and undoubtedly through the content other people are producing around psychedelics, and highly likely, through the content that you're producing as well, enabling that for other people.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty cool what's going on right now. It's a creation of a whole new uh culture, I guess you could say. It's the psychedelic culture, which I mean, you know, it's happened in times past with like the 60s and 70s obviously, but now we have tools that those people didn't have. We have, you know, I'm connecting to you through time and space, miles away. I don't know where you live, but you know, we're not in the same room, put it that way, and I'm connecting
Yeah.
to you and sharing these ideas, and you know, people are listening in on these ideas, and it's just a whole new, it's a whole new realm, man. It's a whole new precedent of that we're setting for this entire headspace, this collective headspace that we're creating. It's really a beautiful time to be alive, man. It really is. Uh,
And there's a lot of legwork that's been done before that, not just in the 60s and 70s with the sort of like first explosion of psychedelic use in the counterculture in America and the Western world. But there's been a lot of good work that's been done even before that, the work of, well, obviously the indigenous people who have been holding the traditions around these substances for millennia. And then
mhm,
insofar as the Western world, the anthropologists that help start speaking about these things, there's lots of space for discussion about the problematic movements or problematic elements of different aspects of academia and the movements with anthropology and stuff. But just, basically to say that people like Richard Evan Schultes, for example, and the work that he was doing by bringing attention even in the field like the academic field, that these things are happening, and possibly these are quite legitimate things for us to be speaking about, experiencing, and wondering about as Western people, in and through obviously the 70s, but then also into the 80s and 90s when, acid started to dry out and people like, Terrence McKenna were coming in and being like, well, but there's this DMT and ayahuasca and this kind of like whole movement towards the natural psychedelics and stuff. So we are all very much conceptually, culturally, standing on the shoulders of giants, of those who have come and for many of them gone before us, which is that they've come through the world, they've done their work, they laid foundations that we are walking on, and they've gone before us in the sense that now they are a part of our past as they no longer live. And
Hmm.
as we will eventually, have become a part of the path that those who follow us will walk when we no longer live as well. So to give credence to all of that as being the shoulders of the giants that we stand on
Yeah,
while we're
amen.
having this conversation with these new tools.
Hmm. Yeah, imagine a Terrence McKenna podcast. Legendary.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, do you think there will ever be a time? I believe there is, and you probably do too. But I'm going to ask anyway. Do you think there will ever be a time where these substances are just kind of they're not like this, offshoot? Maybe it'll work. Schedule one substance. Do you think it'll actually be integrated in our world, and it'll just be like another part of our being, like nothing special?
uh
I mean, they'll always be special.
yeah, okay, I was going to say, like, I hope that that first framing is not what happens, that it just becomes a part of the humdrum. In there we could look at stuff like Brave New World and be like, oh, that's not exactly the direction we want to be going.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think so. And I also think that whether or not that will actually be in service to a good, just going to say that generally, to a good that is for more than our own personal benefit, or for more than the benefit of the early investors, and the corporate sort of like money people. I don't know about that. I am, I here's a place where there's hope, because it's like, what really can I do about it except what I'm doing, which is trying to talk about it in a way that doesn't necessarily encourage the widespread adoption of sort of like the corporate, the consciously constructed corporate sort of language frameworks and paradigm for psychedelics. It's getting pushed into the mainstream, and as a consequence, mainstreaming psychedelic people and psychedelic culture. Beyond doing that as best I can, there's like the hope of like, oh, that we'll get to a place that not just that having psychedelics is normalized, but that what might be the insights that are available through well held, not necessarily easy or positive, but well held psychedelic experiences, that those insights are integrated in how we move through the world, individually, collectively, socially, politically, economically. That's not just going to happen by fact of taking psychedelics in any way. In fact, like psychedelics can be used for the opposite. If you look at things like MK Ultra and mind control, and it's not that the psychedelics, if we just have more of them, their benevolence will shine through in our way in the world. No, but my hopes are that we can, as a species and as a civilization, come to learn from those experiences in a way that can set ourselves up to learn from these experiences and then apply those learnings into our way in the world that has positive impact. And we kind of need to, it doesn't have to be psychedelics, but we definitely need to figure out a different way of going about what we're doing, because it isn't exactly working.
Hmm.
The meta crisis is upon us, and it's not like, the waning of the COVID pandemic in the Western countries that have been able to afford first access to vaccines, and in some sense hoard first access to vaccine from third world countries. As our pandemic experience starts to wane, it's not like the crisis is resolved. We still have a broad ecological crisis that is often unnecessarily reduced into something like global warming or
Hmm.
climate change, when it's actually a broad scale environmental crisis that includes possibly biodiversity collapse and food shortages and clean water shortages and all the rest, like a lot of extreme weather, a lot of really negative stuff. Like, how we've been doing things ain't working well for us in the long term.
Yeah.
What role psychedelics play, I don't know. I kind of like went on a little rant there. I have hope, and I work diligently towards in my personal life and also my professional life to sort of like at least nudge the needle in whatever way is reasonably possible in the time frame that I'm still here.
Hmm. Yeah, so do you think well-held psychedelic experiences that we learn from enable or at least can enable somebody to come to uh the point of view of I gotta give back and do a little more for this dying world that I seem to be living in? Like, do you think that they kind of usher in like a new paradigm in somebody's being to say, wait, hold on, what's going on here? I gotta do something about this.
I think that they can, but not by default. And that has a lot to do with the context in which that psychedelic experience unfolds. I mean, in
Mm,
the literal sense of like who held it, what is the culture that that unique person is in,
yeah.
where are they at in their lives? What kind of life socially, personally, professionally are they stepping into afterwards? What kind of support are they getting? What is the slant, the ideological slant of the people or person, giving them that support? Yeah, so I think it's entirely possible,
Hmm.
and it isn't necessarily something that on its own is going to be the thing, but I think that people who can come to a greater capacity to show up to, I think that there's something about the profound healing and insight and alteration of our sense of self and our sense of the world that can come out of psychedelic experiences that held in a particular way can create healthier, more generative social behaviors and personal behaviors, professional behaviors, and
Hmm.
that those those shifts in people might help contribute to the the larger process we need to undergo in order to have a like to solve, not maybe solve the crisis, but at the very least like come to a better understanding of how we got to be where we are, so that we could maybe from there start to solve some of the crises.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Do you think that's kind of what we have to do at this point is just deconstruct or decompose our self, like our sense of self that we've had, our collective ego, and then kind of almost become anew and realize we're all in this together and, we only have one earth and, the list goes on. Like, is there some kind of like a newfound perspective that we have to come to with psychedelics or without? Like, do you think there has to be like a whole new paradigm we have to come to?
A whole new one, I don't know. Personally new perhaps, but I feel like I would be like idealistically, I like to think that what you just described, which is not too far off from how I'm conceptualizing, what might be a path forward to solve or to resolve or to address the crisis that we're in. Like idealistically, I'm like, yeah, sure. But I would be foolish to think that my idealistic outlook is the actuality of what's needed,
Mm,
that my idealistic outlook and even my idealistic framing of psychedelics is like an accurate picture of what actually needs to happen in order to address these things. Because as far as I'm concerned, the reality is like, I don't actually know. And I'm not sure any of us do. I think a
mm,
lot of us have some really great ideas, and most of those people aren't getting a whole lot of political or capital support, right? Or as in like financial capital support.
mm-hmm.
But I don't think any of us know, because if we knew, we would have done it.
Yeah.
We don't know yet, and this is unprecedented on so many levels. Sure, there have been pandemics before, for example. Sure, the climate things have changed before. We had an ice age, and it wasn't that a thing, that was normal. But like there have been extinctions before, mass extinctions. Yeah, that's true. But our species and civilization has never addressed the scale of what's happening right now,
Yeah, right.
at least in a way that we know to be successfully carrying what's good about our civilizations onwards into the world that's going to follow these crises, whatever it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if
And
there's
psychedelics play a role, maybe. I don't know. And I think so.
yeah.
Reframing ourselves, changing our paradigms, changing how we understand ourselves in the world. I think those are all really helpful. But
Mm-hmm.
what those changes need to be, how we need to be looking at things differently, part of me, like the actual specifics of what will work or what won't work, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I try to do my best not to get lost in A, pretending like I know, or B, forgetting that I don't know.
Yeah, right. I don't think there's one solution. There's not like psychedelics, give every, put psilocybin in the water supply and yeah, kumbaya, the world will be better. It's not like, it's not really that
Yeah.
simple, but I
Yeah.
don't think they hurt. They definitely help the cause, in terms of saving the earth because they literally are the earth. There might be something to that. But
Yeah. They
I don't
certainly
think,
can.
yeah, they definitely don't hurt the cause. And I don't think there's just one solution. But if there is one solution that would help a lot, and this is kind of sad to say, it would be less people on Earth because there's just way too many people on Earth that's just putting out so much energy to the world essentially, and we're just kind of, it seems like we're just putting out too much, and we're just over, we're just sucking the Earth dry of resources, and putting too much carbon into the air, and the list goes on. And I think it's just because there's just way too many people on Earth. So I think if there was one solution, not suggesting anything to anybody, but I think we would just have to come to a lot less population on this Earth and reach a balance in our ecosystem. But how do we go
Well,
about that? I don't know.
the climate might do that for us if we don't
Exactly.
shift
Yeah,
things.
it might just happen.
But I mean, to speak to that, I mean, sure, like things would be different and maybe easier if we didn't have so many people. But possibly there's a number of framing, which is it's not that we have too many people, period, but it's that we have too many people having a particular way in the world that is causing these issues.
Mm,
It's not like it's just more people in general. We are a brilliant technologically enhanced species that can like really address a lot of stuff. Like we have solved a lot of issues that before were unfathomable to
mm-hmm,
even approach, right? And we have a vast majority of people in the world, especially people, who happen to look demographically like us and come from a similar, place in the world, which is like essentially the Western world, and the Western world sort of like growing impact on the lifestyles of the rest of the world. We have a lot of like unnecessary extractive consumerism that
yep,
is being given to us as the meaning of our lives. And that's not to say that, it's like fucking white people, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, but it is, the richest countries,
mm-hmm,
that are doing a lot of the harm.
mm-hmm,
I mean, you could say China is also doing an extreme amount of harm, but also China is like a totalitarian state. And if they're like, we're going to stop changing emissions, tough luck, we're doing this now and everyone has to follow suit or else you're going to get stomped down by the CCP. They'll be able to solve their climate crisis a lot faster than United States or Canada is going to, as both the United States and Canada continue to pander to corporate interests that don't give a shit about climate change or the climate crisis. They give a shit about maintaining profits. And in the process of climate crisis and all the crises that follow through, that's not necessarily bad for profit,
mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to be said there that isn't necessarily about how many people. It's about how as a people we're living on this world.
Very true. Yeah,
Yeah.
very true. I just don't think people are going to change. That's why I'm coming from the viewpoint. I'm like, I don't know if I don't know how many, we'll just say like the developed world, how
20
many,
billion people.
yeah, 20 billion. I don't know. I
I
don't
think
think
it's like
that many
8.
people,
Yeah.
I don't think that many people are gonna, make that change. Or at least the amount that we need to make that change. I just don't see it. Maybe I'm just a little pessimistic in that way. I don't know. I just don't see that happening. Maybe it will be a slow process and we'll have no choice but to change our ways. But at this point, way too many people are lost in the sauce. Like they're just worrying about like what's going on in their Facebook feed. They're not worrying about the climate crisis, bro. Like literally the world is ending and nobody cares. It's crazy. It's insane. It's like, come
Mm-hmm.
on, bro. Like what is it going to take for us to like, there has to be, unfortunately, I think some kind of cataclysmic event to wake people up or some kind of waking up event. I know it sounds cliche, but I think that's kind of what we need. And I thought
The
maybe the
thing is,
pandemic.
sure, or the fires, or
Yeah.
like the floods, like
Yeah.
even I think Al Gore in an Inconvenient Truth, you probably remember that. It was huge. And he
Mm-hmm.
got so much, from what I remember, he got so much flack. Like people being like, you're utilizing, like, basically he said, like, imagine New York underwater, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
were like, you're just utilizing scare tactics to push this bullshit, like democratic liberal agenda. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like less than 10 years later that New York completely got flooded and destroyed by a hurricane in a way that had never happened before. It's like we have had a lot of cataclysmic events. And I think this is the
Mm-hmm.
point you're getting at with the climate, or sorry, the pandemic. Is like, whoa, this could have been it, but turns out it wasn't this either. So what is it going to take? I don't know. And your suggestion that possibly like deeply profound personal experiences of transformation, that can be part of what it takes for the individual, but that isn't necessarily what it's going to take on the larger political, corporate, and industrial end.
Mm-hmm.
Because no amount of recycling or like good work that you do to buy ethical and free range and local and all the rest is going to make a damn of a fucking difference.
Yeah.
It's on that top level that makes the difference. And how is that going to change? Well, I don't know. And I think that the majority of the people that you're speaking to, they're going to change as a consequence of culture and access, and inference on how to live changes through education and changing in legislation, which is likely the way that it's going to end up, creating positive changes overall. But whether or not we're going to be able to do that when we're in societies that are having opinions and political inclinations being altered and manipulated by multi-level narrative warfare and algorithms that are, as far as I can tell, like running amok, way
Mm-hmm.
more powerful than us, creating more harm than good by every stretch of the imagination, like polarization and all the rest. You're probably seen The Social Dilemma, if your listeners haven't, to check that out. It's like, yeah, now I'm at a point where I just hit a wall. I'm like, I don't know. It's huge, and maybe trying to know isn't the right choice. Maybe, and this speaks to the psychedelics, maybe just like sitting down and just accepting that, as far as we can tell, we're absolutely fucked,
Yeah.
and like letting the grief of that set in, and then letting
Mm-hmm.
that inform how we move forward, might be a better choice than any
Mm-hmm.
number of other choices, like
Yeah.
rallying for our freedoms or our jobs or whatever it is.
Yeah, right. Just surrender to the process, I guess.
Yeah.
Damn. I mean, I don't think we're all fucked. I mean, okay, so the majority of us might be fucked, but I don't think humans. There's something in me that says human beings will always survive. Maybe not even on this planet. Maybe we'll be on like another planet, and there'll only be like 20 of us. We'll say, but I think there's something in me, the humans, that says that the human spirit will survive. I don't know why. Maybe that's some idealism, but I don't like consciousness itself. I think will survive. I think there just is some kind of essence in us that we, like you said, we're a very we're a hardy species, and we've gotten through a lot. So I think we can get through this, even though most of us in the future might not be able to get through it. I think there will always be some kind of life somewhere. Like I said, maybe not on Earth, maybe on another
So
planet. Different.
let me jump in on this, on a
Go for
couple
it.
of things that you said about like the human spirit, there
Mm-hmm.
being an essence, about consciousness
Mm-hmm.
continuing on, that humans, that maybe it'll be, off planet. Well, one thing is, what if consciousness isn't just our self-awareness? What if it's actually more than that?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's more than that, then where else might it be? And if it might be elsewhere than just in our awareness, maybe we say that it's in life, all of life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then that would mean that, okay, so humans do survive. And ideally, we survive with our capacities for art and beauty and ingenuity and all the rest of this intact as best we can. Maybe the civilization we had, which at this point, if we just shift it, might be able to sustain at least quasi utopian possibility for us all, right? Maybe that survives, but at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
Is it at the cost of being like, yeah, we survive on another planet, and in sort of like, I live in the SpaceX habitation and you live in whatever Bezos habitation is, like Amazon Lunar Edition or whatever it is, right? And then think about all the species, all the organism, all the complex systems of life
Yeah.
that express themselves as rainforests, as, you know, deserts, maybe not, like mountains and birds and animals of all kinds and plants and fungi and like salamanders, like the tiny little salamanders, and it's like cool, humans will survive, but at what cost?
Mm.
I'm not misanthrope. I think humanity is beautiful. I think I would love us to survive, but will it and should it be at the cost of like every other living species? To feed our sort of like traumatized desperation for more, 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 more on
Hmm.
every level of society, and maybe less and less in certain pockets of people, in certain moments with each other, and in certain shifts in culture and industry. But like, how many species, how many expressions of consciousness are we willing to have die at our hands directly or otherwise? Like that. And that's, I don't know, that's not like an answer. That's just me wondering aloud, right?
Hmm.
Like, ideally, not too many more, but likely a lot more before
Hmm.
any changes happen, but hopefully not all of them
Hmm. I agree.
before we wake the fuck up.
Damn. People listening are like, fuck, why this is a little, I mean, this is what people got to hear though. This is kind of like what we have to talk about ultimately because it's the truth, and we can't hide from it much longer, you know? Like these kind of conversations have to happen, and I mean, I don't know if we're really making a difference in the world having this conversation. Maybe we are, but I mean, the people that really have to have the conversation are, like you said, the people that are in power. Like the certain few individuals that actually decide on certain ways to go about life. Certain policies. People with a lot of money, people with a lot of influence. Those are the ones that actually can make a difference. Because I can get an electric car, maybe take cold showers, don't turn the water on when I'm brushing my teeth. I don't know. We can all make those small changes, but is everybody going to do that? No. Is that really going to add up that much if I do it just myself? Not really. But if there are certain regulations involved or certain, what am I trying to say? Like, ventures through that these big companies go through that actually help the world, that's where the change needs to actually happen. And I mean, I don't know. I think that'll happen, but got a little ways to go,
It's
man.
certainly, it's certainly where the greatest effect of change is going to happen. you know
Yeah.
I think that it was very much so a ploy to get people to think that we as the individual consumer are the problem, that it's our responsibility to make sure that things don't get, the climate isn't getting destroyed
Hmm.
by our individual consumer behavior. It's true that we are responsible for our actions, and we should hold that we are people of consequence, and that consequence is grand and includes a whole lot of things that we won't know about, don't know about, and certainly a whole lot of things that we don't intend, for the better and for the worse. And holding that in mind as we move through the world, that's important, totally. But to think that it's on us that this is still happening, and only on us and our consumer behaviors, was a ploy to sort of like make it so the industry didn't actually have to change.
Hmm.
Industry does have to change. We also have to change. And our changes contribute to a change in the culture at large. And our changes might align us with more or less on certain sort of issues that leave us calling for that kind of change in our, supposedly representational democracies that we live in,
Yeah.
right? And by virtue of that, changing in policy and legislation. That's the ideal. Doesn't seem to work that way. Seems to be more like corporate interest informs it from the top down, rather than democracy being a representation of the bottom up.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, and to speak to like people listening and being like, fuck, yeah, fuck.
Yeah.
But also, there's still beauty and there's still goodness. And there might not be a whole lot of reason for hope right now, but there isn't reason for despair, which is hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
having hope and not doing a damn thing because you're just fingers crossed it's all going to work out because like everything is moving to the light and the love or something. That is just as dysfunctional as it's absolutely hopeless and I shouldn't try at all. They're the same sides of the same coin. I like to think in regards to dying, it's someone I hold as a teacher in my life, Stephen Jenkinson says, like give yourself the gift of living a life hope free, and so yeah, in this there's really good reason to feel a lot of fucking grief and sadness and despair, and that sense there's reason for it, you know and like what if the gravity of that, the gravity of letting that grief move through us is what we need in order to reorient our priorities towards a future that we could bank on.
Mm-hmm.
What if having to really let ourselves be wrecked by this and really let the grief of it all touch us is a required process to even be able to fathom the actions and the movements that might lead us towards some sort of redemption, not just for ourselves but for the planet at large, for all the myriad ways that consciousness expresses itself through life.
Mm-hmm.
And chances are that's not something you're going to be able to do on your own. Something that
Mm.
you have to do in community, and it's also something that we need to be doing while also working with how can we be different too. And again, that's not easy. It's certainly not easy when you're still working out family dynamics and being wrapped in less than functional consumer culture pockets and
Mm-hmm.
increased polarization, where even like your best friend who you like love and care for and deeply trust their love and their compassion in the world and all the rest is someone you're like strongly politically ideologically opposed to and
Mm-hmm.
feel polar reaction to their perspective,
Mm.
even when you're also loving them. And it's like, how do we navigate that even, like it's not an easy process,
Yeah.
and just giving up in depression isn't necessarily the thing that's going to help us, but neither is avoiding the grief. So what if letting in this grief, is, like I said, a necessary process to being able to get to the place where we are able to handle emotionally what's happening and what's coming in a way that still continues to lean towards practically, pragmatically, and positively a better future. I
Well
don't
said,
know,
man.
but maybe.
I think so. I mean, it seems like it. Yeah. I mean, if we ignore the grief, we're just gonna stay on the hamster wheel. We're just gonna keep going. I think it's something that we don't really want to, collectively don't really want to confront right now, because I mean, who wants to confront grief? That means you lost something, right? It's a loss of something. It's a loss of an old world or an old sense of self or an old narrative, right? I just think it's like we're at that point right now where we have to confront that. We have to kind of say like, yeah, this is what's happening, man. That we're approaching the cliff and we might fall off and you might lose yourself, but it's coming either way. Like we have to. Like there's no other way to go about this thing. It's I feel like back when Al Gore made his thing, Inconvenient Truth, it was like, that's just Al Gore. They made a South Park episode about it and it was like this big joke.
Mm-hmm.
But now, what is it? What was that, like 20 years ago already? Probably 15, 20 years ago. 20 years later, it's like, no, this is actually becoming something that should be on our radar, a lot more than it should have been 20 years ago. But now it's like, all right, okay, we're starting to see some of the small effects of climate change that was spoken about in the past. Like, we're
Oh,
starting
we're
to
seeing
see this.
huge effects. And,
Mm-hmm.
for a point of something to think about in regards to how politics and ideology can completely fuck us up as a
Mm-hmm.
civilization. Jimmy Carter, president of the United States, for a single term, from what I remember, in the late 70s, he put solar panels on the lighthouse. He was a nuclear physicist. He understood science. He was like, something is not right. We need to make a change. He put solar panels on the White House and made a speech about how, like, we have two paths. We can start looking at what's happening now and start using our technological innovation to sort of help protect the climate, or we can continue on this other path towards essentially self-destruction. And he was basically saying, like, let's choose pro-environmental behavior. He even funded a study that in the late 70s, like it came out and it was like, yep, according to all scientists, these are all the things that are going to happen if we don't start making a change now.
Hmm.
We need to start regulating fossil fuels. We need to start doing all these things. The changes that are the ones that we're seeing.
Hmm.
But he lost the 1980 presidential election. Ronald Reagan got in instead. And as far as Reagan was concerned, he was like, the thing that's going to, his language, make America great again. That was Reagan.
Hmm.
He said, no, the thing that's going to help us is to get strong. And the only way we're going to get strong is by deregulating essentially everything and moving towards oil and fossil fuels. That's where our power is.
Hmm.
And the whole world was just clamoring to be like the US at the time. And so where we are now is in no small part as a consequence of pro environmental legislative political action being usurped by extremist right wing political ideologies at the very front on behalf of the commander in chief of at the time the most powerful country in the world.
Hmm.
Nowadays it's probably China. But like just thinking about that, like where we are now is like this isn't a surprise. It's a surprise for a lot of people because of how we've been, um, how our attention has been oriented throughout the course of our lives. And for a lot of people, fair enough, thinking about this is like, oh shit, you mean I'm not safe? Nope, you're not,
Hmm.
you know? Um, and yeah, now we'll see. There's like a sense of like, where was I going with this? I felt like I had somewhere I was going with it in the beginning, but now it's kind of shifted off and I'm in this liminal space.
Well, we were
I'm just
talking
going to
about
stop
the
taking
times
now.
past.
Yes, we'll stop talking now.
Well, yeah, man. Gas rules the world. Fuel rules the world. Dennis McKenna actually said that. He said those people should be held on war crimes. Not war crimes. I'm sorry, crimes against humanity. And in the future, maybe they'll be seen as that. These people
There's
that
actually a movement. There is a movement right
really.
now happening to have a legal framework put into international law through the UN and the International Crimes Court to recognize ecocide as a punishable offense.
Wow.
What kind of leverage that'll have, but that's legit happening right now. It's not the first time that it's people have attempted to make it happen, but it's happening now.
Ecocide. That's something new. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, how that would certainly, you imagine if like Jeff Bezos, for example, might end up having to pay billions of dollars as a consequence of being tried for ecocide, 100% he would have different ways of being,
Oh yeah.
like,
I mean, yeah, people have to be held accountable for the actions because it's not like you just, you burn fuel and nothing happens. Like there are consequences to this, and we all know that. We're just ignoring the consequences at this point. So yeah, if we actually do hold people accountable for those consequences, then yeah, they're not going to take those actions. I guess that's probably the only way that we're going to go about it. It's like, yo, if you do this, if you burn fuel or coal or fossil fuels in general, there's going to be consequences for your action, and because of those consequences, we're going to fine you for that. And hopefully that money goes into stuff that actually is like greener projects and renewable projects. It doesn't just go right into the right back into the government's pocket. That's interesting
well, I
though.
mean,
I
if
haven't
it,
heard that.
yeah, I mean, something to look up and put in your show notes, I guess, if you do that.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Ecocide, everybody. Look that up. Man,
Ecocide. Yeah.
ecocide, not ego. That's something else.
Ecocide.
Yeah, it's the
Ecocide
ego
is
side.
taking 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms.
That's the
I'm
ego
just
side.
kidding, guys. Yeah.
Oh man. So yeah, I mean,
I thought this podcast was about psychedelics.
right? It all relates, I guess, in one way or the other. It all relates to this newfound way of seeing ourselves in this world. Because I think that's what if you want to get something from psychedelics, it's a new perspective, right? It's a new way to see yourself, to see the world, to see others in the world, to see the entire ecosystem differently, right? That's at least what I got from it. Like I saw
Mhm.
myself, felt myself in a different kind of light. And because of that, I've come back from those very, very mystical, amazing experiences and said, well, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this newfound way of seeing how I see Gary Haskins and my place in the world? Like, well, I'm going to try and make it a better place, I guess, for people that I'm currently living with and people that will come after me. and I think I'm on that path. I hope I'm on that path, and yeah, it's something that will never leave me. You know, it's that newfound way of seeing how I am and how I act is something that I will forever be grateful for with psychedelics. And I don't know if it's primarily from psychedelics, it might be from other avenues of research and meditation and yoga and whatever it is, man. Whatever I had to do to change my mind. But psychedelics were definitely a large part of it, that's for sure. And
I
I'm
could say
forever
that,
grateful.
say, yeah, what we bring to the psychedelics, certainly psychedelics bring something to us. I am personally in the position where I believe that, especially the plants, that there is an intelligence
Mhm,
present in plants, fungi, animals. I mean, we could break down what intelligence is and how our utilizing human cognitive capacities as a yardstick for determining intelligence is anthropocentric and false, likely.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
but I believe that there is an intelligence that we're interacting with when we're consuming these substances. And some people like to frame that as the inner intelligence or a larger spiritual intelligence or directly the intelligence of the spirit, we'll say, of that particular plant. But nonetheless, I feel like the psychedelics are bringing something to me,
mhm,
right? But what it brings to me, how it arises, what it can reveal to me, how it can speak and reveal and bring things to me, and what out of all of that I can make sense of is all dependent on what I'm bringing to the experience. And so if what I'm bringing to the experience are, dispositions and frameworks and models and understandings that are rooted in, say, psychotherapeutic understanding or attachment theory or ecology or meditation, spiritual practice, all these different fields that I could preload my mind with a sense of these things, that is all sort of fodder. That's all content through which and with which, whatever it is that the intelligence of these things is bringing can bring to and through me. I know that sounds really convoluted, and maybe it just is. But so you're talking about, like, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. Well, also it was all of that. And in that, with psychedelics, there's this opportunity for that intelligence to deeply touch us and leave us with experiences that are profoundly meaningful. And
mhm.
that profound meaning, the experience of that profound meaning, is something that can sometimes automatically, but often as a consequence of intentional cultivation, aka integration, change us as people, change us in fundamental ways that simply just reading about a thing is not able to do.
Yes. Mhm. Experiential meaning. Yeah.
Mhm. And they can hurt us if we're not careful.
Mhm.
They can hurt us in ways that we weren't prepared for, even if we were careful. And they can hurt us in ways that only in hindsight do we realize was exactly how we needed to be hurt and broken in order to come to what we needed to realize in our
Mm.
lives. Right? They could hurt us in ways where we only find out later that that is the way that we've always been hurting, and they just made it real, or they just made it on the surface again,
Mhm.
or what's the word, decompensated or something like that. So we're talking really positively about it, but I want to be clear that they're not panaceas, they're not fundamentally benevolent, they're not magic bullets, they're not always going to be a good time.
Yes. So do you think it's just as important, what you bring to the table with these experiences and going into these states is just as important as, taking the chemical?
I would say that I've heard some people say that it's like 90% of what you get from it is what you bring to it.
Mm.
And my thoughts are something like, we try to calibrate our mindset, which includes the models with which we regard the substance we're taking,
Mm.
what it is, and what the process we're undergoing is. That those things we can cultivate those models in a way that unhinders that psychedelic or that spirit or that intelligence's capacity to offer us lessons, which is then up to us to learn afterwards. And it's very easy to obfuscate those things, that intelligence. It's very easy to miss those lessons. It's very easy to get something that is borderline indecipherable once you're back down to ground zero. And so, yes, the mindset and the models and the frameworks and all the things that we do, the narratives that we hold, that we bring into those experiences, have a huge role to play in what comes out of the experiences that we have with psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
which goes
Setting.
into why things like why I do what I do with my podcast goes
Mm.
all the way back to your first question.
Mm. Wow. That's awesome, man. I don't even know where to go from here. Yeah, I mean, we'll just wrap it up with this, man. How do you see the future? You know, I mean, we're talking. This whole conversation was a little dystopian. You know, it was a little apocalyptic, but I have hope. You know, I think it's maybe a little optimistic, a little too idealistic, some people would say, but I got hope for where we're going. You know, I just, you know, something in me that just believes we're on the right track, even though it seems like we're not. Seems like we're going down the wrong path right now. Maybe we are. Who knows? But I think somewhere along the way we're gonna find our way and find the light and be the being that we should be. So, what do you think?
Uh, I believe that we are presently in collapse and that it will continue and it will get worse. And it is also entirely possible. I don't think it's this point it's possible to stop this collapse from happening. It
Mm,
is necessary. But I
mm-hmm.
do think it is possible that we can come together and learn from and through this collapse, a way of being in the world that might optimize and sort of like reinforce a positive outcome on the other side,
Yeah.
learning lessons that can contribute to something positive on the other side. Something we need this collapse.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
we can't continue doing what we're doing. We need this collapse. And we also need to, in order to have something positive on the other side, we have to sort of like figure out some way of being with each other through this. And as a consequence of this, that sets us up, that can mitigate the damage, certainly. You know, let's not lose too many organisms. Let's not destroy too many ecosystems. Let's not, you know, extinct too many creatures, right? But that we can learn from this and through this a way of being in the world that will set us up for a more positive future. And I don't think that's an inevitable outcome. I think that is an outcome that is possible if we all work towards doing that as best as we can with the contextual resources that we have in the context that we are in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, you know, it might start with grief. Um,
Mm.
but there's
Mm-hmm.
no easy answers in any of that because none of this is easy, you
Yeah.
know. Um, yeah,
Yep. It's a hard lesson, I guess we're gonna have to go through.
that we are going through, you
Yeah,
know,
that we are
and
going
the
through.
fact that we can have this conversation means that you and I are both already having the lesson, or
Mm.
we're alert to the fact that lessons are present and
Mm-hmm.
efforting towards learning. And chances are, if your listeners are still listening, they are too. And
Yes.
kudos to them.
Kudos to you, the listener. And kudos to you, James. Thank you for coming on here, man. This was awesome. Yeah, bro, keep doing your thing. You have a
Thanks,
very,
Gary.
very bright future ahead of you, man. And
Thank you.
other than that, thank you for everyone that listened. Thank you for coming on. Namaste and peace out, brother.
Before you hit end recording, can
Go,
I do a little
go ahead.
shout out?
Oh, so sorry. Yeah, plug anything you want.
Links and stuff. Um, if anyone is interested in following my work, it's jameswjesso.com. My podcast is Adventures Through the Mind. It's anywhere you could possibly find it. And jameswjesso.com is a great place to figure that out. JESSO. Also, if you don't trust social media, me too. Follow me on my newsletter, also available on my website, which I'm sure Gary will link to in his show notes.
Hmm.
And I'm presently writing a book right now. Some of the things that I spoke about today are in there. The newsletter is a great way to be on board with that. And that's all.
Awesome, man.
Thanks, Gary. And thanks for everyone listening for following this all the way to the end.
Awesome, man. Yep, I'll link everything in the description. So yeah, thank you. Peace out, brother.